As a firefighter, I received a report of a hospital fire 5 years ago. We quickly prepared and rushed to the scene. It was a dry day with low humidity. When we arrived, the fire had already spread to encompass the entire structure. When we rushed inside to help the victims, we saw that the first floor was still standing. I left my colleague in charge of that area of the building and climbed the stairs with my senior colleague. As far as the eye could see, the second floor was a sea of fire, and smoke filled the corridor. My senior colleague went to the West Ward, while I went to the East Ward in search of those in need of assistance. The fire appeared to be on the second level, and with the threat of a flashover, we were in a race against time. As I went around the East Ward, I found a woman alone at the far end of the ward. I tried to talk to her, but she was unconscious and unresponsive, and in a dangerous condition, so I hurriedly took her in my arms. Since the woman was the only one who failed to escape, we placed her safely in an ambulance and worked to extinguish the fire. I went to see the woman I had saved a few days later after hearing she had recovered consciousness. This kind of thing itself was not particularly unusual. She nodded as the nurse led me to her hospital room. It was dark when I rescued her, and she was unconscious, and I was frantic, so I couldn't see her face at the time. But she was a petite, lovely lady with fair complexion and beautiful eyes. It was not love at first sight, but I was sure she caught my attention. I told her that I was a firefighter and asked, "How are you feeling?" But she just tilted her head. The nurse next to me looked troubled and wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to her. She smiled. "Thank you so much. I'm fine." She wrote that down and showed it to me. She seemed to be deaf. We then wrote to one another for a while. "My name is Carter Brown. I'm glad that you're okay." "It was thanks to your help. I really appreciate it. Excuse me, but how old are you, Carter?" "I'm 24. "I had a feeling. I'm exactly your age. It's incredible that you're working as a firefighter at my age." No, I still have a lot to learn." Then the conversation stopped. "What is your favorite food?" I asked a random question, but she smiled and responded with a written response. "I like pizza. What about you, Carter?" "I like pasta. What are your hobbies?" "Lately, I'm into reading. I'd lost my hearing due to sudden hearing loss, so I've been spending a lot of time in the hospital reading these days." "I see." Then I talked with her about her hobbies, her childhood, and many other things. She was such a positive person that I never felt that she was deaf. Our time together was very cheerful and enjoyable. Finally, "I'm leaving now." I wrote that on a piece of paper. "Will you come back to see me again?" she asked me anxiously. "Sure, I'll come back." I responded back, returned her wave, and exited the hospital room. But I knew I would have returned to see her even if she hadn't asked me to. I immediately visited the hospital room on my next day off. I worried if my frequent visits to her were bothersome. But by the time I realized this, I was already in front of her hospital room. I reasoned that I shouldn't be turning back now, so I entered the hospital room nervously. When she discovered I had entered her room, she appeared surprised and nodded lightly. I nodded at her and approached the bed where she was lying. Then, "I didn't expect you to come so soon. I'm very happy." She immediately wrote that on a piece of paper. When I saw the paper, I was happy and at the same time a little relieved. Because she mentioned that she had enjoyed reading, I decided to give her the best book I had ever read, and I used the paper and pen I had brought with me. "Have you read this book?" I wrote the question on the paper. Then, "I have. It is my favorite book." She wrote back to me. I was really happy to see what she wrote. When I realized I had grinned, I tried to modify my expression. But she smiled at me too, and her smile was very charming. In fact, when I tried to share this book with my friends up until now, no one seemed interested. Sure, the cover is simple, but as I read it, I was immediately captivated by the plot. I enjoyed it so much that the time flew by while I read it. I was overjoyed to learn that she had read it and felt the same way. Was I happy to have met someone who liked the same work? Or was I happy because it was her who liked the book? Or was it both? I wasn't sure at the time. We also discussed our favorite books, and she ended up lending me one of them. We had a lot of fun that day, and the time flew by. I then decided to study sign language so that I could communicate with her more effectively. I went to see her many times at the hospital with her favorite snacks. Her influence on my life was rising steadily, and then I realized it myself. I couldn't help but be drawn to her. There was never a time when I didn't think of her. I decided to confess my feelings to her. Today, I will definitely tell her how I feel. I came to this hospital room with this determination, but as I put my hand on the door handle, it shook nervously. After a few minutes in that posture, I took a big breath and composed myself before pulling the sliding door open. I recall it being a warm, beautiful winter day, with soft sunlight streaming through the window. She was reading as she was surrounded by that light. The book she was reading was one I had lent her earlier. She looked somehow so much prettier than usual, which made me even more nervous. When she noticed my arrival, she smiled and closed the book as usual. Then we spent the time as usual. I was unable to confess my feelings to her, but when the sun began to set, "I have something important to talk to you about," I asked her. She looked at the paper and nodded, so I continued to put my thoughts on it. "I love you. I like you when you smile. I like the mature expression you sometimes show. I like your positive attitude. I like everything about you. If it's okay with you, will you go out with me?" It took me about 2 minutes to finish writing that much. Then I showed it to her, who was waiting for me to finish writing. Because I had written a little too much, it took her a while to read it. I felt as if time had frozen in the world outside of me while she was reading it. I couldn't look at her face because I was afraid of her reaction. But I looked at her because I was concerned about her motionlessness while reading the paper. Then she looked nervously at the paper I had written on. "Is that a no?" My chest tightened up. Then she wrote something and showed it to me. "I'm deaf, you know. If I stay with you, it will be hard. I'm going to cause you trouble." That's what she wrote. I tried my best to think of a reply. I'm not a brilliant guy who can say witty phrases, so I just wrote what I was thinking. "I just want to be there for you. I'm always willing to help. Is this not a sufficient reason?" Just as her cheerfulness and kindness filled my heart, I wanted to support her. I didn't have any other good reasons or anything like that, but it was my true feeling. When she saw that, she started to cry, and with trembling hands, "Thank you. I'd love to go out with you." She wrote that. That was how we started dating. A short time later, she was discharged from the hospital. We spent time together going on dates, and she came to my house to cook for me. As we got to know each other, I discovered she disliked eggplants and lightning. I also discovered that she enjoyed receiving attention and being rubbed on the head and hugged. I got to know a lot of things about her that I did not know, and I fell more and more in love with her. After a time of dating, we went on a beach excursion on a day when I had a consecutive holiday. At that time, I also learned that she loved going to the beach. She hugged me. "I'm really happy right now." She said that in sign language. I was so overjoyed that I nearly cried, so I lowered my head so she couldn't see me and, "I am happy too," I replied in sign language too. Then I hugged her tightly, spilling a few tears. I had never understood why people cried when they were happy or overjoyed, but thanks to her, I was able to understand such happy feelings. She must have sensed my tears because she patted my head like I often do with her. I supposed I sobbed a little, which was embarrassing for a man. But it was at that point that I recognized we'd continue to spend time together, supporting one another in this way. On that day, exactly 2 years after we started dating, I invited her out to dinner. I had decided to propose that day. So I got all dressed up and made a reservation at a fancy restaurant. When we were shown to our table, she looked at the menu and was surprised at the price. "It's our anniversary today, so it's on me," I told her in sign language. I struggled with sign language at first, but I've grown accustomed to it and am now able to sign more quickly. After finishing the main course and before dessert arrived, I give her the engagement ring. At the same time, "Will you marry me?" I signed her that. I was just as frightened as I was 2 years ago today when I declared my love to her in the hospital room, but I did my best to hide it since I wanted to appear cool. As usual, I couldn't say anything witty and my words were plain, but she blushed and nodded. I did a fist pump under the table and enjoyed the rest of the dessert, and now we are in our 3rd year of marriage. Our time together has become more natural, but I've never forgotten how grateful I am. My wife usually sends me out with a huge smile and is always there for me. I am able to perform my best because of her, even when I'm at the site of a fire where death is nearby. And now, my wife is pregnant. She's almost 8 months pregnant. I can't help but feel excited about the new life that is about to be born, and I can't wait for it every day. Right now, I see her sitting on the sofa in a room where the sun is shining in the west, patting her belly. Seeing my wife like that, I somehow felt like saying something. So I hugged my wife from behind, who likes to be hugged. "I love you," I told her. Of course, there was no way she could hear me. Despite the fact that she shouldn't have heard me, she turned around and used sign language. "I love you too." She told me that. I was very surprised, but I figured that true feelings can be conveyed even if they are not expressed in words. So whether in words or not, I will continue to tell my wife how much I love her. I am certain that I am going to love our child in the same manner, whether he or she is a hearer or not. Because that's what my loving wife taught me.